Hi there. I am over the moon because we finally were able to get in touch with just an incredible woman and wisdom keeper, Barbara Hand Clow, the author of the Pleiadian Agenda, which many of you have heard me talking about, as well as another incredible book that she wrote called Catastrophobia. And then Astrology and the Rising of Kundalini is a very interesting book, as well as the Mayan Code. And now she has pivoted and she has some really interesting new works called The Revelations of the Ruby Crystal and The Revelations of the Aquarian Age. They're two of three of these kind of what is now a little bit more narrative fiction, but still channeled, as you'll hear in the interview. In these very challenging times, in these critical times, all the choices that we make now will determine the future. And Barbara Hand Clow and I have a very deep conversation about what's happening on the planet, the astrology of what's happening, and the historical context of what's happening in a much more cosmological context rather than a lot of the ways that we've been taught horizontal time and space. I just want to read something that Barbara sent us when we finally were able to, we were actually bothering her husband. He was the only contact we could get, and we got an email back from her that said, thank you so much for asking me to have a talk with Guru Jagat. I am part Cherokee and shun visual input as much as I can because it takes away my strength at age 77. I can see Guru Jagat's podcast she's making a deep commitment to the improvement of our planet. And since we are at the ultimate crisis point on Earth now, I'd love to talk to her. As she knows, I'm here from the Pleiades in this lifetime. On Alcyone, the central start of the Pleiades, we went through the same crisis 125,000 years ago, and we survived it by totally changing our approach to energy and technology. I've never discussed this in writing or in public because until now, I had seemed to be a nutty extraterrestrial. Of course, we love nutty extraterrestrials around here. But I am not. I am simply a Metis Cherokee from the Pleiades, brought here at this time to tell this story passed to me by my Cherokee grandfather when I was a child. Simply put, 5G is causing the coronavirus pandemic, and other pandemics were caused by electrification previously, like the 1918 pandemic that started as soon as Marconi's telegraph was turned on. 20 million people died. If we do not change the way we use energy on Earth, we will destroy all life on Earth. Luckily, the astrology for 2020 shows this is the turning point, and I believe we can change this headlong rush to disaster if enough people wake up and identify the problem. Many blessings, Barbara. So we got that email, and of course, we were very, very excited to be able to have this conversation with Barbara Hand Clow and talk to her about these incredibly important and auspicious times. Hope you enjoy listening. I am just beyond thrilled to be welcoming to the show this afternoon an incredible wisdom keeper and seer and incredible prophet, Barbara Hand Clow, who, Barbara, I've been reading your books all my life, and they've very much guided me in knowing my destiny and my mission here on the planet and at this time. And many of you have heard me talk about the Pleiadian Agenda and refer to other incredible works by Barbara, like Catastrophobia, the Mayan, all of the astrology of the rising of Kundalini has been something I've talked a lot about, the Mayan Code, and then these two new books, The Revelations of the Ruby Crystal and The Revelations of the Aquarian Age. So Barbara, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate being able to speak with you.
So I was wondering if you could, just for those who are searching for a little contextualization, give a little bit of both your incarnation as a Pleiadian and also kind of the context of these major times that we're in.
Yeah, and I think before we kind of get to the Pleiadian material, which is, of course, a critical piece of this, I think that the material that's right in front of our faces right now, I mean, the minute I heard from you guys, I knew I had to talk to you. Because are you aware that we are beginning a new 735-year cycle?
I'm not.
Are you aware of that issue? Okay, well, Saturn and Jupiter and Pluto were
Yes.
in Capricorn, as they are now, 735 years ago. And in other words, this is a particular gathering of forces that happens every 735 years. And I know that you're well aware of the influence of Capricorn and how Capricorn structures our reality. Yeah. And so when we have major transits in Capricorn, we always are really on the verge of making a major level of change in our world. And then when these three planets, Saturn and Jupiter and Pluto, come together in Capricorn, then we're dealing with Saturn itself, which is structuring reality and structuring our world. And then we're dealing with Jupiter, which involves well-being and taking care of ourselves and taking care of the planet. And then Pluto, which is the force that drives us into the deepest level of the shift. In other words, Pluto actually really should be thought of as the planet of truth. But in order to get to the truth, Pluto drags us through the dark side. So a lot of people feel like Pluto is kind of a negative force, but I think of it as a very, very positive force.
Me too. I'm a fan.
And Pluto has been in Capricorn since, I'm just trying to remember, I took a few notes. Yeah, Pluto went into Capricorn January 2008.
Right.
And so the cycle that we're coping with now actually started then, and as you know, there was a financial collapse at that time, which was really interesting because I have a feeling, I didn't realize this back in 2008, but now I think I can see that was the beginning of the warning about the financial collapse. Because if we go back 735 years ago, we're back to 1284 to 1285 AD. And some very, very formative things happened at that time. In this case, probably the most important one is that was the foundation of modern banking, which occurred in Siena. The very first modern bank on the planet occurred in 1284 AD. Huh. And so one of the things that we're in the middle of now that's behind what's actually on the surface is a gigantic financial overturning and kind of overwhelm. And so that people are deeply disturbed at that well-being Jupiterian level by what's happening with the actual financial levels of change. And then, wouldn't you know it, that you guys got a probe through to me at the exact moment that this is all coming to a huge, not a conclusion, kind of a explosive turning point would be a better way to put it.
Yeah.
And that is from this spring equinox on the 19th through the new moon yesterday. And that particular period of time, because of the planetary transits, this is like the vortex of the turn. And that's why all of us are feeling extremely worried, frightened, desperate maybe. I want to also get into like some of the more of the application of that. Yeah. But it's affecting our health to a rather extreme degree as far as I can see. And so there's a subsidiary level of this. But it's not really a subsidiary at all, which is called the virus, which is called coronavirus.
Right.
And so I think what we need to do today is to really look into how what's going on with that virus and how that virus is part of the shift itself, because of course it is. That's just how things work.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I've been thinking about, and I don't know what your response to that. Maybe you'd be kind of thinking along the same lines.
Yeah, I think that it's important that people are awakening and have been obviously since, we could put it in all sorts of time, but definitely 11, 11, 11, 12, 21, 12. We have these awakening points. And certainly as we moved into 2020 with those eclipses in January, I feel like this is another turning of a massive vibrational swing on the planet, and that this virus and everything that's happening are in the multidimensional awarenesses are working. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, then of course, as an astrologer, and I think you're an astrologer too,
I am.
At least you know astrology well.
Yeah.
And what we look for is we knew hundreds of years ago, literally, this moment would be like this. And we certainly knew astrologers who are pretty confident, certainly were aware 20 years ago of what's coming up now. Yeah. But astrology can tell you the quality of a period of time. And the analysis of that quality with Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto in Capricorn would be this profound, deep restructuring of reality so that we can manifest our well-being. That would be just a simple kind of way to put that. So we can see that at this point, we're at the ultimate moment with that issue. But astrologers can't tell you what's going to happen. So when the transits start to come on, as they really did basically in 2008, then we're watching to see like what this might create. And what is being created here at this point in time, I can't even begin to stress the importance of really naming it. And as you know, because you've been reading the trilogy, my novelistic trilogy, you have to ask, why did I switch to fiction, after so much non-fictional analysis? But I realized that the magnitude of this moment in time could only be explored in fiction. And that is, what I did was I created a pack of really intelligent characters who were looking at things from many, many different points of view, so that it doesn't have to just be Barbara Hand Clow saying blah, blah, blah. We've got these people with all these different perspectives looking at the situation and also, most importantly, living through it. And I find it terribly interesting that the epicenter, in a way, of the coronavirus issue is actually Italy, because, as you know, the novel takes place in Italy.
Yes.
And the trilogy. And I set it in Italy because of a theory on the part of Carl Kalaman, the biologist. Carl believes that there's a midline running through Italy and all the way through Europe that separates the East-West dynamic and the East-West conflict. And he believes that the energy going through the center of Italy is very important, and so do I. And I think this is why the Vatican, for example, is located in Rome. Right. So way back in 2010, I looked forward to 2020 and said to myself, where am I going to put this, and who are these characters going to be? All this information is coming through. And so way back 10 years ago, I could see that this was the epic moment. And then as I started working on the novel, I wrote the first one and it came out, and then the second one came out. And now I'm working on the third one. And in the third book, which I'm right in the middle of at this point, I picked March 9th, the Virgo full moon, as the apex point for the issues in Italy. And then I actually wrote a scene in advance that had to do with that, but I didn't know what would cause it. And that was the day that Italy went into total lockdown.
Wow.
And so there's a tremendous, powerful kind of messages coming through the trilogy, and all I've been doing is just sitting there and letting it flow. Sometimes I don't even think at all. I just write and just let it happen. And I'm really amazed by the process. And so what I'm trying to get at is that because I've been involved in that activity, that's what enabled me to see something that I think is of absolutely critical fundamental importance at this moment. And that is the issue of what's causing the coronavirus. Because when we have a serious situation developing, and I'm looking for a card here so I can get all these dates exactly right. when we look for the explanation for something critical that's unfolding in our reality, if we can understand what's causing the issue, then we're going to have a much, much more powerful potential for changing it and obviously making the right decisions at the right time. I mean, that's just obvious.
Yeah.
But then, to top that off, this is coming at the end of the 735-year cycle. So that tells a good astrologer that whatever unfolds at this moment relating to the central question, which is what's causing coronavirus, then we can see that this cause of this pandemic may tell us something about the whole last 735 years. And so what happened for me was I just started having a series of really revelatory dreams. That's how I first got a hold of what was happening. And then, because I had certain background information, the whole thing came together. And what's causing the coronavirus is electromagnetic pollution and the turning on of the 5G system.
Right.
And I'll let that soak in. But at that point, once I could see that's what it was, and part of the reason I could see that's what it is that I broke out in a full all-body rash last October when they turned it on in Wuhan. Because what happened in Wuhan, where this whole thing started, was they turned on 5G and the pandemic started. And other people besides me noticed that. I actually picked up that piece of it just by following people's information. And so what happened was 5G was turned on in Wuhan and the pandemic started. And then we go to Lombardy, which is northern Italy, and they turned 5G on in Milan with the Vodafone system right before the pandemic started there. So this took me back to some early research that I did back in the 1990s. This is right around the time that the Pleiadian Agenda came in. The Pleiadian Agenda material came in 1995, and then I channeled it, as you know.
Yeah.
And so back in 1995, I was working with a group of people in Connecticut, and we were trying to fight the cell phone tower installation. We actually launched a great big lawsuit against the government and against corporate power to stop the installation of cell phones and cell phone towers. And the reason that we did that was because a certain number of people in the group were electromagnetically sensitive, including me.
Yeah.
The main person was so electronically sensitive he could barely live. And in my case, I just had some partial systems. And so let's go back through some time, Guru Jagat. And let's go back to 1889. And this was the first flu pandemic. And this was when the power lines all over the world were activated globally. They discovered electricity in the 1870s, but it took them a while to string all the wires and stuff. So in 1889, they strung up the wires so that they could electrify cities all over the planet. And we had the 1889 flu pandemic, which killed millions of people. I don't have numbers here.
Right.
Then, if we go to 1918, we see this is when radio was first activated, Marconi's radio systems. And in 1918, we had the Spanish flu pandemic, which people are talking about quite a bit these days. Then in 1957, we activated radar on the planet, and we had the Asian flu pandemic. And then in 1968, we activated satellite technology around the planet, and we had the Hong Kong flu. And then up to 1996, right around the time that I jumped into it, in 1996, we activated the wireless, the cell phone tower system and cell phones, and we had the North American flu pandemic. And now we have 5G. And here we go again.
The coronavirus.
And, and then if we look at this in terms of a 735-year cycle, back to the other planets in Capricorn. If we look at it from that point of view, it would be fair to say that that was really when humans started kind of dealing with nature kind of mechanistically. That's when modern banking started. We're back to 1284, 1285. And that's when the Silk Road started, which was trade with the Orient. Yeah. And then also at that point, clocks were installed on churches for the first time. And for the very first time, humans started living according to clock time instead of nature, in natural cycles. And so it's fair to say that we've had 735 years of using nature for human purposes. And at this point, we are up against a wall because we have to change this. And I believe we will, and I believe we can. But this is how monumental. The reason that something like coronavirus comes along is it takes something at that level to get people to start to really pay attention.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's a whole lot of scientists and a whole lot of people working in telecommunications on this planet who know everything that I've just said. By the way, I'm also working with a book called, it's by a guy named Arthur Furstenberg, and it's called The Rainbow. I don't have it right here. The Rainbow. I don't have the title. See if I can remember it. I didn't write it down in a card. I'm 77 at this point, so I have to write things on cards. But this isn't my research on the dating of all of these pandemics and all this. This is Arthur Furstenberg. And you can tell by reading Arthur Furstenberg's book, The Invisible Rainbow. But I'll tell you why I think I couldn't give you the title. Guess what happened when coronavirus hit? The book immediately sold out, and you have to pay hundreds of dollars for copies.
Wow.
So until the publisher, yeah, I know, isn't that frustrating? I have a copy. I've had one for quite a while, but people will not be able to get it. Now, I think you can go online and check out his videos and YouTubes and all that, and where he gives the same spiel. But I just want to credit him because he's a monumental researcher, and it's because of him that we know what's going on here. But my point is, millions of scientists on this planet actually know this.
Yeah.
And what is it going to take to get people to realize that they're frying their own families and their own reality and nature just so they can get the latest convenience? And the purpose of 5G is to run artificial intelligence, drones. The purpose of 5G is, to run robotics, all kinds of stuff that we don't need, and probably a lot of people don't want.
Do you believe? What about these theories that basically the quarantines and the stay-at-home orders are to wire the rest of the planet with 5G weaponry?
Yeah, good for you, because that's the very first thing. In fact, this makes me laugh because the other day I was writing up some dialogue where Lorenzo and Armando were talking about the very same thing. And the question would be, if this is triggered by 5G, is it also infectious? Yes, it's very infectious. And the various things that are being done to separate people and quarantine people are a very, very good idea and probably should even be stronger. But then you draw back and you say, couldn't you just turn the switch off, if you see what I mean? It's really ironic from one point of view to be locking people down and quarantining them when you're, shoving the switch harder all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is a nefarious agenda to weaponize the 5G for population control and other reasons?
Here's what I think. I think that there is definitely an agenda with this virus and some of the other flu viruses to create compulsory vaccinations. I really do think that there's always plots behind the plots, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And the main profiteers of the coronavirus would be big pharma and the vaccination makers and all that stuff. I think probably a lot of people have been talking about that right on your show. So I don't think there's much doubt that one of the agendas here is compulsory vaccination, which of course I object to tremendously. But behind that is that why do people do 5G? And as far as I can tell from observing humanity, especially the last 735 years, the forward pressure for progress and competition is so fierce that people will ignore what's happening to human health just to go to the next level of artificial intelligence.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Because people don't seem to be able to stop themselves, you know?
No, it's a compulsion, and at the same time, just like with these other wiring or amplifications of the electromagnetic field on the planet, I do believe that the human that is ready for this in terms of their own mind and body training, they can actually thrive through the 5G. What do you think about that?
Well, with it, we've got history, fortunately, and with each one of these flu. Now, by the way, there was no flu on the planet before the 1889 pandemic. So this is a whole new thing going on in the human body because of electrification.
Right.
So with each one of these pandemics, if you observe it historically, they turn the juice on and amp up the electromagnetic fields, and then a flu pandemic hits. But then it goes away after a year or two. So it would appear that when they up the ante, what happens is that most humans can adjust, and the most vulnerable ones, for some reason, get sick.
Right.
Right?
Right.
That's how it looks. And one of the things that I keep watching for is the millennials and the people, the next generation after the one that's the people that are in their 40s and 50s, because the people who are younger than I am, which is my mid-70s, they've had a tremendous amount of exposure to electromagnetic fields because of using cell phones and stuff like that.
Right.
And of course, most of them are alive. But at the same time, their health is not as strong as it should be. There's a lot of reports on millennial health problems and I think it's because of electromagnetic pollution. So it would appear that we adjust. But I really wonder whether we're going to be able to adjust to fields as strong as 5G. Because when you start putting cell towers every 500 feet all over the planet, and you start to look at the electromagnetic pollution coming from that, you have to wonder, if you know what I mean.
And what do you think about this being also a part of a kind of a darker alien agenda to create a more hospitable atmosphere for them on planet Earth?
I think there's a real issue there. And I'm not famous for looking at things from a really dark point of view.
Yeah.
But if I look at it scientifically, it just doesn't work for me. If I'm finally going to get blown away that way, I'm just going to say sayonara. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But and then what about my children and grandchildren?
Exactly.
But if I look at it scientifically, the way this whole thing functions, and now Furstenberg would do a much better job on this than I would. But the Earth is surrounded by the magnetosphere and the Van Allen belts and the ionosphere, as we know. These are the different levels that go out from the Earth and into the solar system. And every time they turn the juice on, what it does is it affects all of those levels, and especially satellite technology, because satellite technology is up there right in the ionosphere, so it's especially potent. And so if I look at it from an extraterrestrial point of view, and the only place where I'm really valuable on that one is a Pleiadian perspective. And now that I want to make sure that I don't look like the craziest fool on the planet before we get into the issue of being a Pleiadian also.
Yeah.
But I think the data that I've given out so far is extremely solid.
Yeah.
And so if I look at our planet and the electromagnetic field issue and the magnetosphere and all this kind of stuff, this would be hooking this stuff up and electrifying the Earth would be the perfect way for some extraterrestrial force to be able to get in and control this planet.
Right.
Right?
Which has already happened
I mean,
in the history of this planet, obviously.
Yeah. And that's where my consciousness is different. I think the consciousness of a lot of people is very different because, like, it's the matrix issue. For instance, I don't have a cell phone. There's a whole lot of ways that I'm not plugged into this. And so I kind of have a different perspective. And then I think where my perspective is most valuable is that I also actually inhabit the Pleiades. Now, I know that sounds very peculiar, but in my case, I'm part Cherokee, and I was trained in Cherokee tradition as a child. And a whole lot of indigenous native people on the planet believe that they're from the stars and they're connected to the stars.
Yeah.
And so and then when I grew up, this belief was never taken away from me because I was initiated and trained by my Cherokee grandfather, so that this perspective never got shut down in me, which certainly has a lot to do with the work that I've done in this lifetime. And so because it didn't get shut down in me, I actually have experiences of being on Alcyon, which is the central star of the Pleiades. Yeah. And I actually have some data, and boy, I wish I had more, but I have some data on how they run things, because from their perspective, and this is critically important information, from the Pleiadian point of view, we are now going through a cycle that they've already gone through.
Yes.
And they learned their lesson, and they changed things.
And how did they do it?
And I think that's...
Yeah, how did they change, Barbara?
Yeah, well, that's where I wish got it. What I've done my whole life is I've tried to get as much data as I can, and it's very, very hard to pick up on how... It's really hard to pick up on how a field functions in another universe or in another planetary or star system.
Right.
It's like if you've ever taken a trip where you kind of go to Atlantis or something.
Yeah.
You could tell what's happening to you. You might be riding around in a little Garuda or a Vimana or something, but you'd have a hell of a time describing how they power that thing and how they drive it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So and I'm not a scientist either. If I were a scientist, maybe I'd have a lot more data. But I have been able to be there on Alcyon and pick up some things. And I really only have two things to share, one of which I think is critically important, and the other one is just intriguing. I've been able to return to the central temple on Alcyon periodically in order to be there. I'm a teacher there also, so I've been able to go to the temple and, be in the temple and meditate, temple and all that jazz. And the temple is all run by water technology.
Right.
And I can't really tell you exactly how they do it, but they have a whole water system of technology that enables people to meditate and go to very high states of consciousness. So when I go visit there, I just go there and do that, and it's really pretty wonderful. But I can't tell you how they do it. So far, I'm trying. Trying to pick up all the time.
Yeah.
The other piece of information that I think is maybe more critically important is what they did with electromagnetic technology. They discovered, at the same point that we're at now, that if they kept on going the way they were going, that they were going to destroy all life in the Pleiades, or at least on Alcyon. I can't speak for the whole system. But they discovered that they were going to destroy all life. And when they really saw that they were going to destroy all life, they had two choices at that point, which are the same choices that we have now. One choice is to just turn it off and stop it and go back to nature. That's one potential choice. And the other choice is to find technological ways to have those kinds of technologies available to us, but to not hurt any of the species or any of the life on the planet.
Right.
And those are really the only two choices that we have at this point.
Yeah.
And the Pleiades, Alcyon at least, took the second choice. And when I've been able to go there and be there and visit, first of all, I've been able to go into Pleiadian homes, and there is no electromagnetic technology in the homes affecting the people. Now, they either had it in some other form that we don't have, and it was there and I couldn't detect it, but there definitely was no electromagnetic pollution in the homes of the people living on the Pleiades. And then at the same time, they had a fairly advanced level of technology and energy devices, you know, the type of thing that Tesla was trying to invent, but then couldn't because Edison took over, you know, that whole routine of how there actually are technologies that are available to us that aren't harmful, but we didn't go in that direction on this planet. But on the Pleiades, they found ways to work with technologies that did not destroy their environment. And the way the whole thing looked was, it looked to me like they had some really amazing power plants that I don't understand how they ran them, that were completely separate from the people. They weren't connected to the people's environment at all. And that they, as far as I could tell, they used computers and some advanced technology to run those systems, but they had found ways to not harm nature and not harm people.
But also, I loved how you described in the Pleiadian Agenda that the technology as we understand it in AI and all of these things that we're now kind of, we'll say, amateurs in experimenting with here on this planet, they're actually just in many ways a metaphor for what the Pleiadians discovered is our innate capacity in terms of our cyberkinetic and fiber optic ESP and the way that we can communicate and move information through actual psychic channels. Did I understand that right?
Mm-hmm. It's just that where I wish I could offer more is if I understood science better, maybe I could. Actually, I do. There is another thing that I understand that I think might have something to do with this. Have you ever heard of the Blue Brain Project?
No.
Does that ring a bell? Well, back in 2017, I've got buddies around the planet who find things for me because I just need so much data all the time, and people who know what I'm looking for send me stuff, which I just totally appreciate. And one of my finders in Holland sent me a wonderful article about the Blue Brain Project. And the Blue Brain Project is, and what I noticed about it, what I do when I get information like that is then I go ahead and try to find out more myself. And I noticed as I tried to find out more about it, the data was quickly being withdrawn. It would appear that there's a lot of secrecy around this. So I don't know what people are going to be able to find out about it. All I have is just some records that I printed. And the Blue Brain Project is a group of mathematicians, and they're called topologists. And topologists, I've actually discussed them in some of my books. And topologists work with the mathematical components of shape. So their main thing is measuring curved surfaces and all kinds of unusual shapes, and that's just what topology is. And a group of topologists fed gigantic amounts of data into an enormous computer, and they discovered that the human brain actually has 9 dimensions of frequencies. Now, needless to say, that got my attention, right? Because I'm always working with the 9 dimensions, like in Pleiadian Agenda and then alchemy. So they discovered that our brains have 9 levels of frequency, and basically probably 11. There's a whole issue of 9 to 11, which I play with in my own work because of string theory. And I'm sure that these topologists are string theorists, but they didn't say so, so I can't prove it. But what they discovered was they discovered the geometrical shapes of 9 dimensions in the brain. And they were able to actually map those out on computers.
Wow.
And what's fascinating about those, I've seen some of it, and it looks very organic. It almost looks like Avatar in a way. It's very organic, alive energy. And so this, of course, is, for me, I can't prove it or anything, but it proves to me that we think in at least 9 dimensions in our brains.
Right.
That's all I need.
Right.
Was to see that scientists could make geometrical maps of those levels in our brains, right? And so I can use my imagination and imagine that when we go to another level of technology, there may be some way, forget about artificial intelligence and creating robots that can do more than humans can do, or creating a gigantic brain that's smarter than any human on the planet, blah, 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 all that stuff. What if we find a way to actually work with those frequencies to create energy in our reality? And I actually thought that might happen. In 2012, superstring theory was verified at the end of the Mind calendar. And I thought that they might start developing technologies based on string theory. Because I think if they did, I think some of the things we're talking about here today would be possible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, coming from the perspective of technologies to raise the kundalini or the innate electromagnetic frequency of the human, I mean, obviously, I believe that there is, and I've experienced it, and it's what I teach and I do every day. Is there's a way to raise the electromagnetic frequency of the human being to actually be able to transmute at least the nefarious aspects of this and utilize actually the energy in a way that can be an awakening energy. I mean, that's obviously my hope and also my experience just in the
Well, I would think advanced meditators like you, because I know that you are an advanced meditator, I would think that you actually would be able to even detect those different levels. Like you take my work in the 9 dimensions and how I describe it.
Yeah.
I can describe it and fill it out and give it context, but an advanced meditator, I think, could actually tune to one of those or the other. I would think.
Absolutely, and I think that more of these younger starseed generations, I think they have the innate capacity, even without kind of the training of meditation. I think
I think they're probably doing it. I think they're probably reading reality that way.
Yeah, I think it's.
Yeah, I think so.
It's happening, and do you?
I think so. And so then look at it this way. So then we create a reality. Now we're in the third dimension, the solid world. So we created a reality with all these devices and all this electromagnetic frequency stuff. We create a reality that's basically like an old Ford truck. You know what I mean?
Right.
And meanwhile, we have brain frequencies that could enable us to create realities that are completely different than that would do the things for us that we need, And I think you're right. I think the younger people are probably opening up in their consciousness, probably been with them, since they were born.
What's your kind of take on the technologies that the Pleiadians have been using for however long, when they turned, they pivoted? Do you believe that they are already here on planet Earth? There's just reasons why they're not being used, like, greed and corruption?
Well, I think we're definitely here. I was on a channel panel one time years ago at a conference with a bunch of channels, and somebody kind of asked the same question: "Where are they? Are they here?" And we just looked out and said, "We're here."
Yeah, we're here.
And yeah. And so yeah, and I think also the issue of starseeds. I think more are coming in all the time.
Yeah.
Because there's such a great need here, and I think that it's a great sacrifice for people.
Yeah, it is.
It's very hard. It's very hard here right now, boy. I mean, I've had this all-body rash, and maybe other listeners have had rashes and headaches and all this kind of stuff. The 5G is really, really hard on me.
Yeah, it's definitely it's creating that. It's creating a major evolutionary pressure in whatever way.
Yeah, and I do what I can. I don't have a cell phone. There's a whole lot of things that I don't have that make life pretty convenient that other people have. But it's just the frequencies. Once you set up these systems, it takes over all the frequency fields of the planet, all the way out to the magnetosphere.
And can you explain to our listeners just your experience of, like, you're very, I love how kind of sober you are about these kind of expanded perspectives in terms of how people look at reality. But in the Pleiadian experience and how you channel some of that information and your direct experience, how does that happen for you?
Well, back in 1994, I think it was November, I suddenly just got hit. I described it in Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, where I had just a credible multi-dimensional vision. And basically, I turned into like a computer taking in information. It was like the hard drive in me got all this information laid on me. And so then I called together a group of channeled sessions where I channeled the information that came in. And that was from November 1994 through like maybe April of 1995. And then I transcribed, excuse me, those sessions, and they became the Pleiadian Agenda book, and which was very popular because people could really tell there was something deeply authentic about it, which I believe there is. I think that's Pleiadian Agenda and Alchemy of Nine Dimensions are my most important and original works coming from the Pleiadians. So I channeled it in, and I didn't understand half of it.
Yeah.
And I went out and taught it, even though I didn't understand it. And a whole lot of other people out there, students and everything, helped me understand a whole lot of the material that came in. So that's how that happened, and it's still people still are into it. Reading it and stuff, as far as I know.
Does it continue that kind of, is it an open channel, or how does that work now for you in your current work?
Okay, so now I'm doing the trilogy, and the trilogy is a conventional work of literature, as you know, because you've been reading it,
yeah.
And it's a conventional novelistic form, but of course it's channeled. In fact, I think some of the best novels that people have written have been channeled.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because sometimes you read a novel of such complexity and subtlety that you really have to wonder where it came from,
Yeah.
Yeah. Excuse me. And so a lot of people have been really frustrated when I went to fiction from nonfiction. But the reason I did that was I needed to express what I know in 9 dimensions instead of just through me. And so this is a truly multi-dimensional trilogy. But I think probably the only way I could be bringing it in, I must be channeling it.
Absolutely.
All I know is I just keep working on it.
Do you, this is an odd question, Barbara, but I had a visitor this morning when I got up to meditate that I figured might have been one of your Pleiadian crew. They were meditating in my room when I woke up, and they were about 8 feet tall. It sound familiar?
They're about 8 feet tall?
Yeah, it was,
Yeah.
kind of, I mean, I've had a lot of Pleiadian experience, but I felt that whoever this was sent by maybe your one of your council members to come and check me out this morning.
It could be. It could be. When I've seen them, and I've seen them twice, they were like Casper the Ghost. They were about maybe 18 inches to 2 feet tall. And they were like little electromagnetic blue beings, and I've seen them twice only. And so, but the Pleiades has a whole lot of stars, and I get all kinds of wonderful reports from who shows up. So I think those are probably Pleiadians, I would imagine.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
probably checking you out. Yeah, I know.
Seemed like it.
Well, Guru Jagat, I've just surrendered. Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I've been able to do with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the guidance is, I mean, I plotted the novel that I'm working on now in 2018. And I set up March 9th as the sort of ultimate point, in this case, for the initiation of Armando. Armando is the painter that goes all the way through the whole trilogy. And then it turns out that that's the day that Italy goes into lockdown. And like, how could I do that except that it's coming from guidance.
Yes.
Coming from some kind of guidance.
Yeah.
And I just offer myself, since I know how to write, I offer myself as to receive it and transmit it as best I can.
Yeah.
Fortunately, my publisher is really supportive, because my fans, a lot of fans don't want to read fiction. They want answers. They want, answers A, B, C, and D. But
Right.
I really had to go to another level of subtlety.
Right.
Do you like it, the trilogy?
I think it's a incredible way to transmit a new octave of what's coming through, and so I've really been enjoying it. And I also feel like this isn't just because you have you've demarcated. You were doing nonfiction and now you're doing fiction. I think these lines blur quite a bit, so I find I don't really see it as. But
do the characters move you?
The characters are powerful and very sophisticated. I thought that was a great way of putting it.
The reason I'm asking is a trilogy has a certain structure, which is the first book introduces it. And so in this case, Revelations of the Ruby Crystal gives you the whole fabric.
Which
of
is
their
what I'm
families
on.
And houses and all that stuff. It's just the basic milieu for the book. And then the second book in the trilogy deepens it and takes it to another level. And then the third book in the trilogy is a transcendence. It's where the characters in the book actually go to a higher level. And wow, it's really, really something to be the author of these people going to the next level.
I can't wait.
That's kind of how it's going. Yeah.
I'm just on the first one, so I'll have to tell you as I get into the second one. And when does this third one publish, Barbara?
Oh, the third one probably 2022.
Wow.
I think. I can't finish it until the end of 2020, which is this year.
Yeah.
So then I turn it in, and then it goes through the whole publishing process and stuff.
That situation.
Yeah.
Can you explain, because I do think this is an important point for these times, just the whole concept of catastrophobia and how the fear of end times is actually a memory instead of a premonition?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. Because if we go to the Aries new moon chart yesterday, and we see that the nodes of the moon, the north node of the moon is in Cancer, and the south node is in Capricorn, so there go with Capricorn again. And then the nodes, which are the karmic axis of any astrological chart, are T-squared, which means a square formed. The nodes are opposite each other, 180 degrees, and then the T-square is 90 degrees. And right at the T-square point is the moon, sun, Chiron, Lilith, and Sedna. Right there, squaring the lunar nodes. And what this tells us, because of Sedna, now what's Sedna? Well, Sedna is another planet that was discovered in 2004. And I haven't written anything about it because I've been, And Sedna is the planet that rules, it appears to be the planet that's ruling the catastrophic cycle on planet Earth. So Sedna came in the last time, 12,000 years ago, when Atlantis fell. And as you know from Catastrophobia is the basic thesis of Catastrophobia is that there was a gigantic cataclysm in the solar system and on the Earth 11,500 to 12,000 years ago.
Right.
And during that cataclysm, we became a multi-traumatized species. And the thesis of Catastrophobia covers all of the span of time from the cataclysm up to the present moment and how we're healing ourselves from being a multi-traumatized species. And so when we see at this critical moment in time that Sedna's right in there with the new moon, we can say definitively that this moment is healing ancient catastrophic fear. So on top of everything else that's going on, like turning on G5 and so on and so forth, we're also feeling this deep level of intense emotion coming from that cataclysm 12,000 years ago.
I think it's imperative reading, and I'm gonna, I've been telling. We were just in Egypt, and I really encouraged everyone to read it before we went. But I'm gonna be putting it out there more in our community, just because I do think right now it's really important contextualization, and I love what a historian you are, but such a cosmological historian, because nobody puts it in the, like, I've never had anyone really show that kind of width around the time-space continuum, but it's very important to understand this right now.
And we're doing really well. Like, if you look at our generation and the generation older than us, our parental generation, I don't know how old you are, but the generation that's of parents who are now gone.
Yeah.
We have broken through the Victorian denial, and then our generation, basically the baby boomers, our issue was to heal emotional wounding. And our generation has produced a cadre of really fine healers and really fine thinkers. And then if we go down to the next generation, there's one in between the boomers and the millennials. It's called the lost generation or something like that. I never could get that term right. But as we go down through time, there's more and more healers and more people working with wounding and waking up.
Yeah.
And so we're doing it. I feel that we're doing it. And our challenge is to have this technology thrown at us that's making us sick.
Yeah. Yeah. And how to move. Because I also feel like, part of the technology besides the 5G is basically awakening the hybrid AI inside of us. Forget the outside robot. It's the robot intelligence that has been kind of being conditioned by our usage of the technology.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the they're calling it, the hive mind or whatever. Some of the theories around waking this 5G up is waking up the kind of hive mind hybrid AI intelligence in the human species that's been conditioned through technology.
Yeah.
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 Barbara, anything else that we should just be thinking about in these times before we go? Thank you for...
Well, I feel complete. I feel really complete. You certainly managed to let me, I especially think that rundown on the other pandemics and how this is progressing, I think is of critical importance now. If people don't realize what's causing it, how are we ever going to get to the bottom of the problem? All we're going to get is people lined up for their enforced vaccinations.
Yeah.
This is a wake-up call.
It's major, and you speak of like some of these future dates, like 2046 and 2053, and we talk about in the yogic traditions 2036. Is there any other kind of future points that might be relevant?
Yeah, I don't do that because imagine what it's like. This trilogy right now is tracking 2011 through 2020. Imagine what it's like. I never look into the future. I can barely handle the present.
Interesting. Yeah.
I used to look into the future because obviously I realized 20 or 30 years ago that this was going to come up at this point. But now I'm not looking into the future. I'm totally focused into the solutions in the now, except for one thing. We have Saturn is going to conjunct Jupiter a couple of days before Christmas this year, and that's called a trigon. You ever heard that term?
Yeah.
Saturn and Jupiter conjunct every 20 years,
yeah.
And it's a known fact on the planet, all the way back to the Roman Empire, that a whole new regime of political structures always comes in at that point. So 20 years ago, it was 2000 and George Bush and all the wars in the Middle East. And something else is going to happen with this next conjunction just before Christmas this year. Some kind of new form is going to be appearing. And they conjunct in 0 degrees Aquarius. So just before Christmas this year,
wow.
We get a trigon right in early Aquarius, another sign of the new age, of the age of Aquarius,
wow.
really coming into form.
Wow, wow, wow.
So we'll be thinking pretty differently at that point.
I haven't
haven't gone beyond that further into the future.
Well, I'm in the midst of this first of the trilogy, the Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, and then the second is called Revelations of the Aquarian Age. Do you have a name for this third or not yet? You can't tell us, right?
I've got the third book. I'm working on it, as you know, but I don't even have the title. The book is, I'd say, probably 60 to 70% complete at this point, so I'm doing fine on that. But I don't have a title. I don't know what to call it.
All right. Well, we're going to be...
They'll tell me. All my titles come in the middle of the night, and then I get it. So it'll come.
Well, we'll just thank you so much for everything that you're doing and everything that you're contributing, and thank you for taking this time with us. It means the world to me, and I know so many people were so excited about this interview. And I know you don't do social media, but I will mention that your website, handcloud2012.com, is a place to get things, media and books and that kind of thing. Any other way that people can connect with you, or that's the best way?
No, I'm like really hidden.
Yeah, I know.
It's just the intensity of what I'm doing. I'm going to be back out, though. I usually am out teaching and lecturing, but this is just so intense that I can't do it. And when the minute that Harmanjot contacted me, I knew I had to talk to you. So, it's been a real pleasure, and I really, really appreciate support. Because all of us need it so much at this point.
Thank you so much, and bless you, bless everything you're doing, and
bless you.
Talk again. I hope. Satnam. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Reality Riffing. These are conversations that I think are important with people who are doing great things in the world about subject matters that need to be discussed. If you enjoyed the content, the conversation, please feel free to share with your people, share with your friends and family, rate the podcast below, and also subscribe.